And then I left last class on this question that can media be used as a propaganda tool? And everyone in the class answered in affirmation. Everyone said that the answer is yes. Yes, media can be used as a propaganda tool. Sometimes politicians can be engaged in propaganda. Sometimes governments can engage, foreign media, foreign countries, state apparatuses, or even journalists, reporters, editors themselves can also be engaged in propaganda. Um, Here, in our previous two slides, we were talking about the idea of propaganda. However, in this slide, from this slide onward, we will be learning about propaganda model. Now, before I begin, I want to ask you a question that have you ever observed or experienced or noticed propaganda happening on media? And like, how do you know that the information that you are seeing seems to be a propaganda? Like, in any experience, would anyone like to share any experience?
Yes, ma'am. There is an example of Nisha Shafi and Elizabeth's case. जब मीशा शफी ने एक प्रोपेगेंडा एलिजाबेथ के खिलाफ हरासमेंट का किया था.
Yes, very good, very good. All right. Now, let me tell you that the propaganda model was actually proposed by two American scholars, and it is based on a book that they wrote, which came out in 1988. And in that model, in that book, this is very important for you to understand because here I am actually sort of lying the base of your understanding. In this model, those scholars, two American scholars who actually co-authored a book, they suggested that apparently it is assumed that propaganda can be observed in societies where democracy is less developed or democracy is still developing. Pakistan is one of those societies. Pakistan is an example where democracy is less developed. Democracy is weak. We have had military uh, governments for a very long time. Pakistan, for the most part of its existence, was ruled by the military governments, the armed forces. And of course that is not democracy. Democracy is actually a system where people choose their representatives, people choose their own government. All right, now these are the people who are going to rule us, which is opposite in military government. Now those two scholars who proposed propaganda model, they were of the view that in weaker democracies propaganda is easier to observe. However, propaganda also exists in developed societies such as United States, such as United Kingdom, all Western powers. They are visibly developed societies. Of course, no one has ever observed any military rule in a country like America. Democracy rules there. They have regular elections. People choose their leaders. People choose their representatives. People choose who is going to hold the office for them. So it is assumed that in weaker societies propaganda can be easily observed. However, propaganda also exists in developed societies such as USA, but it is hard to notice. I suggest that do not read the content which you see on screen. Instead, first listen to me, so that because it will help you developing your understanding, and then together we will read the content. It seems that in USA, media is developed. Of course, the country is developed industrially, democratically, and in every respect. So it is assumed that, well, propaganda cannot maybe happen in a country like United States, where media is so active, where media is so dynamic, so vibrant, and all that. But these two scholars, I'll tell you their names. Their names are Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky. These two scholars, they said that, well, many people would say that propaganda does not exist in a country like United States, but that is not true. There is always propaganda, however, it is hard to notice. And they presented a propaganda model, and in their propaganda model they showed and they demonstrated that, see, this is how propaganda is happening in America's media system. Does this all make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Good.
Yes, ma'am.
Now see, let's read the content here together. Propaganda model. Propaganda is easier to observe in politically unstable societies. See, this is the same thing that I was just saying. Pakistan is a politically unstable society. Well, not recently, however, if you remember in Nawaz Sharif government time and in the Benazir government time, many times it would happen that governments would change overnight and new government will come or interim government will come. However, in democratic societies like the United States, propaganda is hard to be noticed or identified. This is the same thing. Many people would assume that, well, US seems to be apparently a developed country. The government is strong, the government is democratic, media is very strong, media is free, active. It's not like, well, Pakistani media does face restrictions, but in United States the situation is different. You cannot possibly restrict information, you cannot possibly restrict journalists to not to publish a news story, to not to broadcast a news story. However, this cannot be said that propaganda does not exist in US. The propaganda does exist in US. And through their propaganda model, Herman and Chomsky are going to show us how. Now, and another important thing to notice here is that uh, the this model that we are going to learn today, this model was presented in the context of the US culture. This model was presented in the context of the US society. It is quite possible that not the whole model is not applicable for us, Pakistan. It is also possible that only parts of this model are applicable for our media system. And it is also possible that maybe the whole model is applicable for our Pakistani culture. But the important thing here to consider is that the model was presented in the context of American society. The model actually was presented for America. Since the scholars who presented the model were Americans, they were studying American society, they were studying American media. So their thoughts are pertinent to the functioning of American media. This is a very important thing that we all need to consider. All right. Any questions about your understanding so far? Any questions? Gee, does this all make sense? Heather Kamal,
Yes, ma'am.
can you summarize what I just said?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, you said that American society की आपने बात की थी और I'm sorry I cannot summarize properly. Actually, मेरे mother अभी निकली है मेरे घर से, so she was diagnosed cancer day before yesterday, so I was quite upset because of that.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm so
No,
sorry.
no problem. She
Where,
just left right now, so a bit upset.
was she diagnosed just yesterday? Was she diagnosed just yesterday, Heather bete?
She was diagnosed a day before yesterday.
The day before yesterday. I'm sorry. my prayers, and I hope you feel better soon. Let's ask Abdullah. Ji Muhammad Abdullah, can you summarize what I just said in for the information for this slide?
मैम आपने अभी बताया कि ये जो यूएस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में था और ये सारा उसमें, उसके बाद मैम आपकी आवाज जो है वो कट रही है ज्यादा ना क्लियरली, वो पता ही लग रहा कि व्हाट आर यू ट्राइंग टू।
Afroz, can you summarize what I just said? Afroz Ahmed.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me? Ma'am, you said that. I'm sorry, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Ji, go ahead, please.
Ma'am, you said that जो propaganda model in the media community, it does not only happen in the developing countries or the third world countries. It also happens in countries like America and the developed democracies, as we call them. So we expect that media there is very strong, so it doesn't happen there, but it also happens there as well.
Shabash, very good job. Shabash Afroz, very good answer. Yes, this is not to say that propaganda only happens in countries where democracy is weak. It also happens in countries that are developed. Shabash, very good job. Let's proceed with our next slide. All right, this is again the same information that I have just given you. Propaganda model was proposed by, I told you that the model was proposed by two scholars. So this is the name of the first scholar, Herman. Here I have given only his surname. His full name was Edward S. Herman. And this is the second scholar, Chomsky. His full name is Noam Chomsky. So in 1988, their book came out, and this is the title of the book. You see the content that I have highlighted. The title of the book is Manufacturing Consent, colon, the political economy of mass media. And you may notice that I have italicized the title of the book, just so that the book stands out. All right. Now, let's talk about manufacturing consent. What is your understanding about the idea of manufacturing consent? What is consent? What is consent? Let's ask Hubab. Hubab, bete?
Ma'am, sure.
Consent.
Consent is like asking someone the permission,
Yes.
like having their agreement to something.
Very good, very good. Consent is agreement. If somebody asks me, well, let's eat lunch at 1 instead of eating it at 2 or 3. So do you give me your consent? My consent is my agreement. I agree that instead of eating lunch at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, let's eat it at 1. That is my consent. Or if someone says, let's go for a morning walk tomorrow. So do you give me your consent that we should leave at 6 in the morning? And I give my consent, yes. Consent is agreement. In Urdu, we use a word, razamandi. That is consent. Consent is actually razamandi, when you agree to do something. All right. And in the title, the second word is consent. The first word is manufacturing. Manufacture. Who are manufacturers? Manufacturers are actually the people who manufacture something. Manufacture is the meaning of manufacture is to produce. For example, uh, you buy milk. Let's say you buy Alpus to freeze dry or to just to drink it. So there are manufacturers, people who produce that milk, who actually process that milk and then pack it in that Tetra Pak form. So that is manufacturing. There are toothpaste manufacturers, soap, detergent manufacturers, shampoo manufacturers, fabric manufacturing. Manufacturing means to produce something. Now, do you understand the title manufacturing consent? People who are manufacturing our consent through propaganda. This is what is happening. Like how do you win people's opinion? If If you say, well, currently it is very important for us to spend a lot of money at the vaccination of COVID-19, it is quite possible that many people say, well, vaccination is not much important. Well, inflation, price hiking is more important. Let's focus on that. But if you are giving constant messages that, see, we are at a risk if we do not get ourselves vaccinated, that is actually the spread of info. I'm not saying this is propaganda per se. What I am saying is that through advertisements, through the spread of information, you are actually manufacturing consent of people that let's get vaccinated. Getting vaccinated right now is the most important thing. If you have commuted in the city in past few days, you may have noticed advertisements on poles. They are encouraging people to go for vaccination, go for COVID-19 vaccination. They are manufacturing consent, which means they are preparing you to agree with them. That is the idea of manufacturing consent. Now, if everyone is clear about the idea of manufacturing consent, can I proceed? All right. It says propaganda model traces the routes by which money and power are able to filter out the news fit to print, marginalize dissent, and allow government and dominant private interests to get their messages across to the public. What does this mean? Let me explain this to you. Now, propaganda model, we are learning here that what does propaganda model do? Propaganda model tells you, it identifies and it determines that how money through propaganda happens by those people either who have money or they have power, like governments. People who are in government, they have power. People who have money, like advertisers, they also have power. How these people filter out information, what they filter out, what news is fit to print, okay, what will be published and what will not be published. Marginalized dissent. Let's first talk about the word dissent. The meaning of the word dissent is different. How many of you, by the way, remember Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist who was killed in Turkish consulate? How many of you know him?
मैम इन न्यूज़ स्टोरीज जब वो हुआ था केस तभी पता है
Shabash Hasib, your voice was.
and it's and Mohammed bin Salman of KSA was accused of murder.
Yes, yeah. He
And later
yes.
और उसकी डेड बॉडी को जो है वो कोई छुपा दिया गया था इस तरह
it was a planned murder. It was a planned murder.
Very good. Now you remember. So his body was dismembered. It is said, well, the intelligence agencies, they reported after their investigation that probably his body was dismembered, and while he was still alive, and of course consequently he died. And then it is also said that his body was packed, the pieces of his body were packed in a sack, and they were transported to Saudi Arabia. However, you all remember that's Saudi journalist, right? I just wanted to ask, right? Aftab, Jahanzeb, Zahra, Aksa.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you all please turn on your cameras? Fatima, do not do the attendance of those students whose cameras are off. Ji. So I was talking about Jamal Khashoggi, and Jamal Khashoggi was a dissident. The dissident, the word dissident is related to the idea of dissent. Dissent means different. Jamal Khashoggi was a dissident. Now, if you recall the history, you may know that Jamal Khashoggi, although he was a Saudi citizen, the citizen of Saudi Arabia, he was living in the United States, and he was writing in the Washington Post. He wrote with the Washington Post, which is a famous American newspaper. So Jamal Khashoggi used to write with them, and in his writing, he would criticize monarchy in Saudi Arabia. He would criticize the king and the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. In other words, Jamal Khashoggi was very critical and was very vocal about the Saudi government. Probably that is why he was a dissident. Now, do you understand the idea of dissident? Do you understand what is dissident? What is the meaning of
Is it
dissident?
like what Hamid Mir is doing right now?
Ji bete?
Is it like what Hamid Mir is doing right now?
Yes, many Pakistani journalists do that. They come up with a different opinion. A dissident is a person who has a different opinion, who is different. So now you all are clear about dissent. I explained with the example of Jamal Khashoggi. Now let's talk about the idea of marginalize. Marginalize are those people who are uh, who are weak and who are unprivileged and who are at the margins of periphery, marginalized. Um, uh, Here, this means to silence dissent. For example, uh, minorities in Pakistan. Well, you may have read in news that minorities in Pakistan, unfortunately, are suffering from discrimination. They are also suffering from, sometimes unfortunately they suffer from hardships, miseries, and even people's mistreatment. People mistreat Christians, people mistreat Hindus here, and there are also cases you may have uh, you may have read in newspapers the stories of forced conversions, forced marriages, especially in the province of Sindh. So when you are marginalizing dissent, this means you are silencing people who are different. You are silencing groups of societies that are different. They are raising their voice, or they are that are different or that are vocal. Afroz Ahmad just gave the example of Hamid Mir. Sometimes Parvez Hoodbhai, who also does that. Sometimes Salim Safi also does that. There are many other journalists in Pakistan who have been critical of even military establishment in the country, or sometimes they have been critical of judiciary. So the meaning of marginalized dissent means that you are giving less importance to people who are different. They can be journalists, they can be marginalized groups, they can be like minorities, they can be people related to ethnic groups, linguistic groups, and all of that. With that, I want to ask you that have you now understood the meaning and the idea of marginalizing dissent? Do you understand what it means? Marginalized dissent? Good. Now, so what do they do? People who have money or power, what do? They filter out information. How? They filter out what news will be published. They filter out how to silence dissent. They filter out, they kind of create the system to allow governments and dominant private interests to get their messages across to the public. So, for example, if it is said that, well, it is important for you to, many people say that, and this happens in advertisements. If they are, I will give you the example of Chomsky. Chomsky said that this is in the interest of the US government to create fear from Russia. While Russians are coming, so that the government can manipulate its policies related to Israel, Palestine. Government can manipulate its policies related to issues in Afghanistan, Iraq, and especially Middle East. To repeat, the model was presented by two American scholars. That is why you see that they give examples from American media, from American issues, from American political examples. All right. I am a little slow on this model because I understand that it is really important for you to understand. There are some concepts that you may feel a bit fuzzy. However, we will finish this in the next class. Now I have almost 6 minutes remaining for today's class. If you have any questions, you can ask me now. All right. Now, let's talk about the second bullet. In the second bullet, Herman and Chomsky argue that it is difficult to see a propaganda system at work where the media are private and formal censorship is absent. He's referring to the US. In Pakistan, do they do censorship? Have you ever heard about censorship happening on movies, or have you ever heard about that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Many times camera does that.
ma'am.
Many times DGPR does that. You may have heard that government has banned this particular book. Government has banned this movie. Sarmat Khusat, a few days ago, I heard he made a movie, but this was banned. So you see, there is.
Malik was also banned.
जी?
The movie Malik was also banned.
किसने बनाई थी?
वो आशिर अजीम ने बनाए थे.
Yes, Ashir Azim.
अच्छा अच्छा ठीक है. हाँ. So yes, censorship.
सरमद खूसट की तो जिंदगी तमाशा मूवी है, वो बैन.
हाँ, जिंदगी तमाशा भी. शाबाश शाबाश दाऊद. Now, formal censorship exists in Pakistan. However, in US there is no formal censorship. Well, yeah, they say media is free. They can publish whatever they want. They can broadcast whatever they want. So he's referring to US. And then media is also private. In Pakistan today, media is private. However, before PAMRA, media was not private, especially electronic media. Now we have tons of FM channels. You may have listened to FM 100, FM 106, FM 103, FM 105, so many FM channels. However, before that, there was only Radio Pakistan. Before PAMRA came into being in 2003, by the way. Before PAMRA, there was only PTV, Pakistan Television, which was a state-owned channel. However, the case is different in United States. United States has many private, like all media is private. Well, think about all media companies in US. 20th Century Fox, that's a famous movie production house. They make movies. When a film begins, when a movie begins, this begins with the advertisement of 20th Century Fox. Disney is a famous company that makes animated movies and motion pictures as well. That is also private. Similarly, the New York Times. It's not like the US government owns the New York Times. It's a private newspaper. Same is the case with the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and all the USA Today, and all the famous American newspapers. So Herman and Chomsky are referring to the United States. They are saying that it is difficult to see. Again, they keep saying that, well, people can say that propaganda can, for example, United States. I'm sorry, Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, the media is totally owned by the government. Whatever information they show, they cannot show it or broadcast it without the permission of the government. So media is totally controlled, censorship is there, censorship is present, and media is not private. It is owned by the government. In that case, you see, well, yeah, propaganda is happening. We know that we are not getting the complete information. Whatever information we are getting is censored. However, in USA, where formal censorship is absent, where media is also private, it is difficult to see propaganda system at work. But it is there. And in the rest of the model, Herman and Chomsky are going to show us how. All right. With this, I'm going to end today's lecture. I have still 2 minutes for this class. You can ask me. Aftab, was this clear to you? Aftab Jahaze?
Ma'am,
Aftab, I cannot hear you. Amina, just
सॉरी मैं वो हाँ
Ji?
म्यूट करना भूल गया यस मैम कैन यू हियर मी नाउ मैम
Yes, yes, I can. Was this understandable?
यस मैम
This is a bit difficult, but if you pay attention, you can understand it. That's why I keep checking your level of attentiveness. Amina, yes, go ahead.
मैम ये जैसे कुछ मूवीज होती हैं और वो ISPR अप्रूव करता है कि ये मूवीज चलनी चाहिए, उसमें भी कुछ सेंसरशिप होती है, तो वो भी इसकी एग्जांपल हो सकती है.
Yes, yes. Pakistan में तो propaganda होता है. We cannot claim that there is no propaganda in Pakistan. ISPR is actually Pakistan Army's public service wing, and whatever information comes about Pakistan Army that comes from ISPR, that already kind of filters information. Okay, what information should go to public and what should not. Okay. All right, students. With this, I'll end today's lecture, and I will see you all. I will see you all on Friday now.
Inshallah. Okay, love.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.